My family has owned this 20-acre property since before the adjacent housing development even existed. The natural freshwater pond that occupies nearly 5 acres of my land has been my pride and joy since childhood. Crystal clear water fed by underground springs, surrounded by native cypress trees and lush vegetation. A perfect, pristine ecosystem that remained untouched even as developers cleared the neighboring land for cookie-cutter homes 10 years ago. I never begrudged the development itself. People need places to live, and the builders initially respected the clear boundary line where my property ended. They even used my picturesque waterfront as a selling point for their homes, advertising lakefront views, despite none of their properties having actual water access. This arrangement worked fine for years, with a mutual understanding that the water belonged exclusively to my property. After college, I pursued my passion for wildlife rehabilitation, specializing in reptiles that most people feared but I had always found fascinating. With proper licensing, training, and facility upgrades, I converted part of my property into a legal alligator sanctuary. The process took 3 years of paperwork, inspections, and specialized habitat construction. Each of my 12 rescue alligators came with their own story of human conflict, injury, or displacement. Some had been illegally kept as pets and grown too large for their owners. Others had been deemed nuisances in developed areas. All of them would have been euthanized without rehabilitation facilities like mine. The first sign of trouble arrived with Karen Morgan, newly elected president of the Lakeside Gardens Homeowners Association. I met her at a county meeting regarding water management. While I introduced myself politely, her eyes never quite met mine, instead staring past me at the pond visible through the meeting room windows. "That is quite the waterfront property you have there," she said, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "Seems like such a waste for all that shoreline to just sit there unused. The community could benefit from access to such a beautiful natural resource." I politely but firmly explained that the pond was part of my private, licensed wildlife sanctuary. "It is actually being used," I told her, "just not for human recreation. It is carefully managed habitat for endangered species and rescue alligators." Karen laughed as if I had told an amusing joke. "Alligators? In our neighborhood? Surely you are not serious about that. Sounds like a convenient excuse to keep others away." The conversation left me uneasy, but I dismissed it as casual ignorance rather than a genuine threat. That changed 2 weeks later when I spotted Karen and 3 other HOA board members standing at my property line. They carried clipboards and measuring tools, pointing toward the water and taking notes. When they noticed me watching, they quickly returned to HOA property, but their intentions were becoming painfully clear. That evening, I sat at the edge of the pond, watching Brutus and the other alligators glide silently through the water during their evening feeding. These magnificent creatures trusted me, depended on the safe haven I provided. As the sun set over the water, casting golden light across the surface, I made a silent promise to protect them and their habitat from whatever Karen was planning. Little did I know just how far she would go or what consequences would eventually unfold. The first official communication arrived in my mailbox on a Tuesday morning. An innocent-looking envelope bearing the Lakeside Gardens HOA logo, containing a letter that made my stomach clench. The document, titled Community Waterfront Access Initiative, detailed the HOA board's plans to partner with adjacent property owners to create shared recreational spaces for all residents. My property was specifically mentioned, with a proposed access corridor, clearly marked on an attached map. I immediately drafted a response, attaching copies of my property deed, survey documents, and most importantly, my state and federal wildlife rehabilitation permits. My letter was professional but direct. The proposed access corridor would directly interfere with a legally established wildlife sanctuary. No trespassing or development can be permitted under state and federal regulations, protecting the endangered species and rescue animals housed on this property. The HOA acknowledged receipt but offered no substantive response. Instead, the boundary violations began. First, it was just footprints along the shoreline. Then small items left behind, a beach towel, a plastic float toy, soda cans. I installed trail cameras at key points along my property line, which soon captured Karen herself wandering onto my land, smartphone in hand, taking videos of the waterfront. When confronted directly about her trespassing, Karen adopted an innocent expression. "Oh my, I am. Must have gotten turned around on my walk. These property lines are so confusing without proper fencing." She glanced toward the water. "And really, I do not see any of these dangerous animals you claim to have. Perhaps you have exaggerated their presence to keep this beautiful shoreline private." Just as she said this, Sadie, one of my female rescue alligators, surfaced nearby with a gentle splash. Karen jumped back dramatically. "That is just one of my 12 residents," I said calmly. "Sadie was rescued after someone illegally trapped her and cut off part of her tail. The others are typically less visible during daylight hours, but they are all here, and they all consider this their territory." Karen regained her composure quickly. "Well, that thing looks practically stuffed, probably just floating there. Besides, the community has rights too, you know. Water access is a fundamental need." The encounters grew more frequent. One morning, I discovered a line of wooden survey stakes along the waterfront, each bearing an orange plastic flag. They had been placed well within my property line. I removed them immediately and called the county surveyor, who confirmed no official survey had been authorized. The most alarming incident occurred on a Saturday afternoon. My security alerts pinged repeatedly as a group of 5 people crossed my property boundary. Through the camera feed, I watched Karen leading 4 well-dressed individuals across my land. She gestured broadly toward the water, speaking animatedly about potential development and community amenities. One man in a business suit took measurements while another photographed the shoreline. I grabbed my property documents and wildlife permits, rushing down to confront them. As I approached, Karen was saying, "The owner has some wild story about alligators, but as you can see, it is just a scare tactic to—" She stopped mid-sentence when she spotted me. "You and your guests are trespassing on a protected wildlife sanctuary," I said firmly. "Please leave immediately." The businessman looked uncomfortable, quickly retreating toward HOA property. Karen lingered a moment longer, her expression hardening. "This is not over," she said quietly. "That waterfront is wasted on reptiles. The community has plans, and you cannot stand in the way of progress forever." As they departed, I noticed something that sent a chill down my spine. Glossy brochures in Karen's hand, featuring what appeared to be architectural renderings. My peaceful sanctuary was clearly under threat, and Karen was moving beyond mere boundary violations to something much more organized. 3 days later, the official Lakeside Gardens HOA newsletter appeared in every mailbox of the adjoining community. A neighbor who had always been friendly with me texted a photo of the front page, and my heart nearly stopped. There, in full color, was a digitally altered image of my waterfront property, transformed into a beach party scene complete with canopies, barbecues, and families playing in the water. Bold text across the top proclaimed, "Community Beach Day, Saturday, July 15th, a day of fun in the sun at our new lakefront access." July 15th. The exact weekend I had mentioned to several neighbors that I would be attending a wildlife rehabilitation conference 3 states away. This was no coincidence. The article detailed plans for what they called Phase 1 of our community waterfront project, describing how volunteers would clear a section of underutilized shoreline for community recreation. The blatant trespassing and property violation were presented as a community improvement project, with no mention that the land was privately owned or operated as a wildlife sanctuary. I immediately called every HOA board member. Not one answered. I left increasingly urgent voicemails explaining the legal and safety issues, followed by emails with attached documentation. Hours passed with no response. Finally, I drove to Karen's house, but no one answered the door despite her car being in the driveway. The next day, I consulted with a property attorney who reviewed my documents. "You have absolute legal rights here," he confirmed. "Your property deed is clear, your wildlife permits are in order, and you have documented their awareness of both." He sighed heavily. But enforcing those rights against a determined HOA can be complicated. Courts move slowly, and temporary injunctions are not guaranteed, especially on short notice. That evening, while searching social media for any additional information, I discovered Karen's personal page filled with promotional posts about the event. "Exclusive waterfront access for Lakeside Gardens residents," one post exclaimed. "Finally breaking down the barriers to our community's rightful water recreation area," declared another. Most disturbing was a comment from Karen responding to a resident's question about the ownership issue. The adjacent property owner has selfishly restricted access for years using ridiculous wildlife claims. It is time we exercised our community access rights. My lawyer prepared a formal cease and desist letter which I hand-delivered to Karen's home the following morning. She answered the door this time, accepting the envelope with a smirk. "Legal threats? Really? You should be more community-minded. This could get very unpleasant for you." "This is not a threat," I replied. "It is formal notification that you are planning an illegal trespass on protected wildlife habitat. There are serious liability issues for both the HOA and individual participants." Karen's eyes narrowed. "We will see about that." Later that day, a neighbor sent me a screenshot from the community Facebook page. Karen had posted a photo of my cease and desist letter with the caption, "Look at this. Our reclusive neighbor thinks sending scary legal letters will stop our community from accessing natural resources that should belong to everyone. Beach Day is proceeding as planned. Do not let wildlife fiction scare you away from OUR waterfront." The comments section overflowed with supportive messages for Karen, with residents excited about finally having lake access. A few voices questioned the legality, but were quickly shouted down by Karen and her supporters. As a final attempt at resolution, I sent a registered letter to the entire HOA board detailing the specific legal liability each board member would face for orchestrating a mass trespass onto protected wildlife habitat. I included photographs of my alligators and documentation of their territorial behavior, emphasizing the genuine safety risks to any trespassers. The response came 2 days later on HOA letterhead. "The board has reviewed your concerns and rejects your characterization of our community access plan. Historical use patterns and public waterway access laws supersede your claimed restrictions. The event will proceed as scheduled." That night, staring at the pond where moonlight reflected off the still water, I made my decision. I would not be attending the conference. Instead, I would stay and protect my property and my animals, not through confrontation, but by allowing nature to take its course. Karen had made her choice, and now she would have to live with the consequences. With just 1 week remaining before the planned beach party invasion, I canceled my conference registration and began implementing a comprehensive defense strategy. This was not about winning a petty neighborhood dispute. This was about protecting my legal rights, my property, and most importantly, the welfare of the rescue alligators under my care. My first step was documenting everything. I compiled all property records dating back 3 generations, highlighting the clear boundary markers and water rights. I organized my wildlife rehabilitation permits chronologically, including all inspection reports confirming my full compliance with state and federal regulations. Every communication with the HOA, every social media post by Karen, every trespassing incident captured on my security cameras, all cataloged and time-stamped. Next, I consulted with the state wildlife authorities about the situation. The head ranger was appalled when I showed him the HOA newsletter and beach party plans. "This is not just trespassing," he explained. "It is a violation of protected habitat regulations. Your rehabilitation license requires you to maintain specific environmental conditions for those alligators. A beach party would constitute habitat disturbance under state law." He provided me with additional documentation about the legal protections afforded to licensed wildlife rehabilitators and promised to have rangers available on call the day of the event. However, he noted they could not preemptively block the event without a court order. "Document everything," he advised, "and make sure your warning signage is absolutely clear and visible." Taking this advice to heart, I installed 12 new warning signs along my property boundary, each 48 inches tall with bright red lettering. "Danger private property, authorized wildlife sanctuary alligator habitat, no trespassing violators subject to criminal prosecution and civil liability." Each sign included the relevant state code numbers and was positioned every 50 feet along the waterfront property line. My security system received a significant upgrade. 8 additional high-definition cameras were installed with overlapping fields of view covering every possible access point to the waterfront. Each camera was connected to cloud storage that would preserve footage regardless of what happened to the physical devices. Motion sensors would alert me to any boundary crossing in real time. The alligators themselves required special attention. While I never trained them for public interaction, I needed to document their normal territorial behaviors to establish the predictable risk that Karen was choosing to ignore. For 3 consecutive days, I recorded video logs of each alligator's routine, paying particular attention to how they responded to unusual noises and activity near the water. Old Brutus, my largest male at 14 feet, was particularly territorial. When I set up a test dummy near his preferred basking spot, he approached it with textbook territorial display behavior, hissing, head slapping the water, and eventually charging toward the perceived intruder. Sadie and the other females were generally more cautious, but would still approach unfamiliar objects in their territory with investigative intent. The younger rescues, while smaller, were actually more unpredictable in their responses to disturbances. I time-stamped each behavioral video and added it to my growing evidence package, along with a written assessment of the predictable risk factors. Not once did I manipulate or train the alligators to behave aggressively. I simply documented their natural protective instincts toward their established territory, instincts that Karen and the HOA were willfully choosing to ignore. 3 days before the planned event, I took my final preventative measure. I prepared a comprehensive liability warning packet containing verified property boundaries, wildlife permit documentation, alligator behavior assessments, safety protocol requirements, and most importantly, a memorandum from my attorney detailing the personal liability exposure for each HOA board member if anyone were injured during their organized trespass. I sent this packet via registered mail requiring signature confirmation. My security camera captured the postal worker obtaining Karen's signature, followed by Karen barely glancing at the envelope before tossing it onto a side table and returning to distributing beach party flyers to passing neighbors. The day before the event, I received a call from my friendly neighbor in the HOA community. "They are going ahead with everything," she warned. "Karen has rented tables, canopies, a sound system, and even ordered a truckload of sand to be delivered tomorrow morning. She is telling everyone your alligator story is fabricated and that you will be out of town anyway." That evening, I sat on my back porch, watching the sunset reflect orange and gold across the water. Several of my rescue alligators floated silently on the surface, their ancient eyes occasionally blinking, their powerful tails making subtle adjustments to keep them in place against the gentle current. These creatures had survived millions of years of evolution. They had no concept of property lines or homeowners associations or human entitlement. They only understood territory, survival, and instinct. As darkness fell, I checked my camera feeds one last time and prepared for what would certainly be a day of confrontation. I had done everything legally possible to prevent what was coming. Now it was in the hands of fate and the alligators. The morning of July 15th dawned bright and clear, a perfect summer day for a beach party. I had been awake since 5, monitoring my property through binoculars from my upstairs window. The pond was peaceful, with only the occasional ripple betraying the presence of my aquatic residents below the surface. They seemed to sense something was different today. More of them than usual had positioned themselves near the shore that bordered the HOA property. At precisely 7:15 a.m., my security system pinged with multiple alerts. On my monitor, I watched a pickup truck pull up to the property line. Karen emerged from the passenger side, dressed in a colorful beach cover-up and oversized sunglasses, clipboard in hand. 4 men in matching event staff T-shirts began unloading folding tables, beach umbrellas, and large coolers. Karen directed them with grand gestures, pointing to specific locations along my shoreline. Without hesitation, they crossed the clearly marked property boundary, ignoring the prominent warning signs. The men began setting up a large canopy tent directly on my property, not 20 yards from a known alligator basking spot. Karen supervised the placement of tables underneath, occasionally consulting her clipboard and making adjustments to the layout. I grabbed my property documentation, wildlife permits, and phone to record the interaction, then walked calmly down to confront them. As I approached, Karen spotted me and her smile faltered momentarily before returning with renewed determination. "Good morning," I called out. "You are currently trespassing on private property and a protected wildlife sanctuary. I need you to pack up and leave immediately." Karen turned to her workers. "Continue setting up, please." Then to me, "I thought you were supposed to be out of town this weekend. How unfortunate that you have chosen to harass community volunteers." "This is not harassment. This is my property. Those are my legally posted warning sign." You just walked past. This area is a licensed alligator rehabilitation habitat, and you are creating a dangerous situation. Karen laughed loudly, ensuring her workers could hear. "Oh, please, not this alligator fiction again. We have researched riparian access laws, and this waterfront qualifies as a community resource under adverse possession principles. We have documentation from 3 separate attorneys." "Then your attorneys are misinforming you. There is no adverse possession claim here. My family has actively maintained and defended this property for generations. More importantly, there are actual alligators in this water. Large, territorial rescue alligators who will defend their habitat if threatened. One of the workers glanced nervously at the water. Karen noticed and quickly interjected, "Do not listen to these scare tactics. If there were really dangerous animals here, there would be state warnings, not just homemade signs." This is a classic case of one selfish property owner trying to keep natural resources from the community. As if on cue, a deep bellowing sound came from the water about 30 yards away. Brutus was submerged except for his eyes and nostrils, but the distinctive territorial call was unmistakable. Two of the workers took involuntary steps backward. "That is Brutus," I said calmly. 14 feet long, approximately 800 pounds. He is one of 12 rescue alligators who live in this protected sanctuary. This is their territory, and they will defend it instinctively from perceived threats. "Ridiculous theatrics," Karen snapped, though her voice had lost some confidence. "Probably some recording you are playing. The event starts at 11 and you cannot stop it. If you continue this harassment, we will call the police." "I encourage you to call them," I replied, holding up my wildlife permits. "I have already spoken with state wildlife authorities who are on standby. Every person who enters this property has been formally warned of the danger and is knowingly trespassing on a licensed wildlife rehabilitation facility." Karen's face flushed with anger. "We will see who the authorities support when 50 tax-paying homeowners want access to water that should belong to everyone. Now, if you will excuse us, we have a beach party to prepare." Realizing further confrontation would be pointless, I returned to my house, documenting everything on video. Over the next 3 hours, I watched through my security cameras as the trespassing escalated. A truck delivered several tons of sand, which was spread along my shoreline, creating an artificial beach. Speakers were set up, a volleyball net installed, and coolers filled with ice and beverages. At 11:00 a.m., cars began arriving. Families with children, couples with beach chairs, teenagers with floating devices, all parking along the HOA streets and making their way to the waterfront. Karen greeted each arrival enthusiastically, handing out brochures and directing them to various beach areas she had designated along my property. Some guests hesitated upon seeing the warning signs, but Karen quickly intercepted them. "Those are just the property owner trying to scare us away," I could hear her saying through my cameras. "There is nothing dangerous here. This is our community's waterfront now." By 1 o'clock, nearly 50 people had invaded my property. Children splashed in the shallows while adults lounged on beach chairs under umbrellas. Music blared from the speakers, and the smell of grilling food wafted through the air. I continued documenting everything from inside my house, occasionally catching glimpses of submerged eyes appearing briefly in the water before sinking below the surface again. The alligators were aware of the intrusion, but had not yet approached the crowded areas. At precisely 2:17 p.m., Karen climbed onto a makeshift platform constructed from stacked coolers. Someone handed her a portable microphone, and the music was lowered. My cameras captured her triumphant expression as she addressed the crowd. "Friends and neighbors, welcome to the first annual Lakeside Gardens Beach Day." Cheers erupted from the crowd. "Today marks a victory for our community, the reclaiming of natural water access that should have been ours all along." More cheers and applause. Karen continued, her voice growing more passionate. "No longer will one selfish individual keep this beautiful shoreline all to themselves with ridiculous claims and intimidation tactics. This water belongs to all of us, and today we declare." She never finished her sentence. From my window, I watched as several people at the water's edge suddenly began pointing. Heads turned. A child screamed. There, approximately 20 feet from shore, Brutus's massive head had emerged from the water, his eyes fixed directly on the crowd of trespassers invading his territory. And he was not alone. Brutus moved with deliberate slowness, his armored body creating a subtle, V-shaped wake as he glided toward the makeshift beach. From the opposite direction, Sadie appeared, her smaller but equally intimidating form breaking the water's surface. Then a third alligator emerged, and a fourth. Within moments, 7 of my 12 rescues had positioned themselves in a loose semicircle, facing the shore where the party had suddenly gone silent. Through my security cameras, I watched Karen freeze mid-sentence, microphone still clutched in her hand. The color drained from her face as she stared at the approaching alligators. For several seconds, no one moved or spoke. The only sound was the gentle lapping of water against the shore and the low hissing emanating from Brutus. A woman near the water grabbed her toddler and backed away rapidly. This broke the spell of shocked silence, and murmurs of concern rippled through the crowd. Karen quickly regained her composure and raised the microphone again. "Everyone stay calm," she announced, her voice betraying a slight tremor. "This is obviously a setup. Those are clearly fake alligators or mechanical props the owner has placed in the water to scare us away." A teenage boy pointed excitedly. "They are moving, look at their eyes." Indeed, Brutus had advanced closer to shore, now only 15 feet from the nearest swimmers. His massive tail swayed rhythmically beneath the surface, propelling him forward with the patience of a predator who knows retreat is inevitable. "They are just sophisticated decorations," Karen insisted desperately. "Probably remote-controlled devices. Do not let yourselves be intimidated by these childish scare tactics." From my vantage point, I could see several parents hurriedly gathering their children and belongings. A man in swim trunks approached Karen's platform. "Karen, those look pretty real to me. Maybe we should." "Absolutely not," Karen cut him off sharply. "This is exactly what the property owner wants. If we leave now, we will never establish our rightful access to this waterfront. I will prove these are fake." To my horror, Karen descended from her platform and began marching toward the water's edge. The crowd parted before her, many already retreating toward the property boundary. Karen stopped at the shoreline, pointing dramatically at Brutus, who now floated motionless about 12 feet away, only his eyes and the ridge of his back visible above the water. "See, it is not even moving now, just a floating prop designed to." Her words transformed into a shriek as Brutus suddenly performed a territorial display, slapping his massive tail against the water with a crack that sounded like a gunshot. Water sprayed in all directions. Karen stumbled backward, losing her footing on the wet sand. She fell awkwardly, landing half in the shallow water with a splash. Panic erupted. Parents scooped up children. Beach chairs toppled as people scrambled to grab personal belongings. The orderly beach party dissolved into chaos within seconds. Someone knocked over a speaker, cutting the music and replacing it with the sounds of shouting and splashing as guests fled toward the property line. Karen scrambled to her feet, soaking wet and missing one sandal. "Stop! Everyone stop!" she shouted, but no one was listening anymore. Brutus had advanced to within 10 feet of shore, while the other alligators began spreading out along the waterline. None were actually pursuing humans or behaving aggressively. They were simply reclaiming their territory through intimidating presence, exactly as they had evolved to do. One man, attempting to retrieve a cooler of expensive beer, ventured too close to where Sadie was gliding parallel to the shore. She hissed loudly, causing him to abandon the cooler and sprint away with surprising speed for a man of his size. Within 10 minutes, the beach was almost completely evacuated. Abandoned chairs, towels, coolers, and personal items littered the shoreline. Karen stood alone near her collapsed platform, her beach outfit soaked and muddy, staring in disbelief at the alligators that now freely patrolled the water's edge. I decided it was time to make an appearance. Walking calmly down to the property line, I kept a respectful distance from both Karen and the alligators. The wildlife authorities have been notified, I informed her quietly. They should be here shortly to ensure everyone's safety. I suggest you leave my property immediately. Karen's face contorted with rage and humiliation. You planned this. You trained those monsters to attack us. I did not plan or train anything. These are wild animals in a rehabilitation sanctuary, behaving exactly as wild alligators naturally behave when their territory is invaded. Exactly as I warned you they would in multiple documented communications. As if to punctuate my statement, Brutus bellowed deeply from the water, causing Karen to flinch visibly. In the distance, sirens wailed, growing louder. Someone had indeed called emergency C. Our vices. This is not over, Karen hissed before turning to march stiffly back toward HOA property, leaving wet footprints in her wake. Within 30 minutes, 3 wildlife management vehicles and 2 police cruisers had arrived. The remaining partygoers huddled in a group at the HOA clubhouse, while Karen gesticulated wildly, apparently giving her version of events to a police officer. When the head wildlife ranger approached me, I calmly presented my documentation: property deeds, rehabilitation permits, communications with the HOA, warning signs, and security footage of the entire incident. The alligators behaved exactly as expected, the ranger confirmed after reviewing my materials and observing the animals, who had now retreated to deeper water but remained visible. You are properly licensed. Your warning signage exceeds requirements, and there was no unusual aggression beyond normal territorial behavior. He shook his head as he surveyed the abandoned party supplies still scattered across my property. What these people did was dangerous and illegal on multiple levels. Trespassing on private property, disturbing a protected wildlife habitat, endangering minors. They are fortunate no one was injured. As the authorities began interviewing witnesses and documenting the scene, I stood quietly at the water's edge. Brutus drifted nearby, his ancient eyes watching calmly now that the threat to his territory had passed. In that moment, I felt a profound connection to these prehistoric creatures who asked nothing from the world except respect for their boundaries, a simple courtesy that Karen had been unwilling to extend to them or to me. The morning after the beach party disaster dawned quiet and overcast. I walked the shoreline at first light, documenting the aftermath with my camera. Beach chairs embedded in the mud, abandoned coolers leaking melted ice, trampled vegetation along the bank where panicked guests had fled, plastic cups, food wrappers, and personal items scattered across my once pristine wildlife sanctuary. Wildlife officials arrived by 9 to help assess the damage to the habitat. A biologist carefully examined the pond's edge, taking water samples and checking for any signs of stress among the alligator population. Environmental contamination appears minimal, she concluded, but these soil erosion issues along the bank will need remediation. The disruption to the alligators' routine may cause territorial behavior changes for several weeks. By mid-morning, news vans had appeared at the property line. The alligator beach party disaster had apparently made regional headlines. I declined all interview requests, instead focusing on the cleanup efforts and documentation for the inevitable legal proceedings to follow. At 5:00 p.m. my phone rang. It was the HOA vice president, a man named Thomas whom I had met only briefly before. "There is an emergency HOA meeting tonight at 7, he informed me, his tone formal but not hostile. "Given the circumstances, we believe it would be appropriate for you to attend and present your perspective." The community center was packed when I arrived. Every seat was filled, with additional residents standing along the walls. As I entered, the room fell silent. I felt dozens of eyes tracking me as I made my way to the empty chair reserved in the front row. Karen sat at the board table, her expression stony, refusing to meet my gaze. Thomas called the meeting to order and immediately addressed the previous day's events. "As many of you know, yesterday's community beach party ended in a manner that has exposed our HOA to significant legal liability. Multiple homeowners have reported terrifying experiences, and several children remain traumatized. We have called this emergency meeting to discuss our response and path forward." For the next 40 minutes, residents took turns expressing their outrage, not at me, as Karen had likely expected, but at the HOA board itself. A father described how his 6-year-old daughter had nightmares after seeing a dinosaur coming to eat her. A retiree detailed how the HOA's insurance representative had already contacted him about potential class action exposure. A lawyer who lived in the community explained the personal liability that each board member could face for organizing an illegal trespass onto clearly marked private property. "My family could have been killed," one woman exclaimed. "There were warning signs everywhere that we were told to ignore. Who authorized this?" All eyes turned to Karen, who shifted uncomfortably in her seat. "The entire board approved the Community Access Initiative," she began defensively. "Our legal counsel advised that riparian rights—" "That is complete nonsense," interrupted a gray-haired man identified as a retired judge. "I reviewed the property documents. There are no riparian access rights to privately owned, fully enclosed pond systems. This was trespassing, plain and simple, and the board knew it." Thomas cleared his throat. "At this point, I would like to invite our neighbor to address the community." I stood and faced the residents, many of whom looked genuinely contrite. I kept my comments brief and factual. I explained the wildlife rehabilitation program, the legal permits, and the multiple warnings provided to the HOA board. I showed photographs of my alligators and clarified that their behavior had been defensive rather than aggressive. "I never wanted conflict with your community," I concluded. "My only goal has been to provide a safe rehabilitation habitat for these protected animals. The alligators did exactly what wild alligators naturally do when their territory is threatened. They created distance through intimidation, not attack. Had they wanted to harm anyone, the outcome would have been very different." The meeting continued for another hour, resulting in 3 significant outcomes. First, Karen and 2 other board members were asked to resign immediately, which they did with obvious reluctance. Second, the HOA formally acknowledged my property rights and wildlife sanctuary status in their official minutes and agreed to distribute a written apology to all residents explaining the situation truthfully. Third, they approved restitution for all damages to my property and habitat, including the cost of professional environmental remediation. In the weeks that followed, the community's attitude shifted dramatically.